welcome to your deep dive on emergency response speaking,
Yeah.
a skill that can help you navigate any unexpected situation,
Hey.
whether it's a tech meltdown at work or
Oh.
maybe a coffee machine explosion.
And you'd be surprised how often those skills come in handy. Today, we're pulling insights from Business English Podcast,
Okay.
specifically episode 38.
Oh.
It's a treasure trove of practical advice on communicating effectively when things go sideways.
Buckle up. We're going to explore everything from building your verbal first aid kit
Yes.
to mastering the art of speed speaking without sounding like you're panicking.
Yes.
We'll even uncover how to give status updates that manage anxiety instead of creating it.
And we'll touch on how culture comes into play,
Yeah.
because communicating effectively in an emergency often means navigating different cultural norms and expectations.
So let's start with the idea of a verbal first aid kit.
Yes.
What exactly does that look like?
Imagine you have a set of phrases ready to go, just like you would have a first aid kit for physical injuries. These phrases are designed to help you take control of a situation quickly and project an aura of calm, even if you're feeling anything but.
So what are some of those go-to phrases?
The podcast highlights what they call the golden trio for grabbing attention, setting the tone, and providing direction.
Okay.
First, you have your attention grabber.
Yeah.
This requires immediate action.
Mhm.
Deliver this in a lower pitch and slower pace than your usual speaking voice, and it instantly commands attention.
Almost like a verbal stop sign
Exactly.
to get everyone focused.
Then you set the tone
Okay.
with something like, "We have an urgent situation that requires your focused attention." Notice how this is different from shouting, "The server's crashed."
Right. It's about staying calm and collected, not adding to the chaos.
And the podcast shares a compelling example of a Fortune 500 company that saw a 64% improvement in response time just by switching to clear, concise, and commanding language in their emergency communication.
I love that.
They call it the triple C approach.
So we've grabbed attention, set the tone.
Right.
What's next?
The third part of the golden trio is a directional phrase that gives people a sense of what's happening next.
Okay.
Something like, "These are the immediate steps we're taking." You're essentially providing a roadmap, even if it's just a very preliminary one.
So it's about replacing panic with a plan,
Exactly.
even if that plan is still evolving.
And as the situation unfolds, your emergency phrases need to evolve too.
Yeah.
Think of it like acts in a play.
Okay.
You start with an alert, then move to providing status updates,
Okay.
and finally give clear directions for next steps.
So the language adapts to where you are in the response process.
Exactly.
Does the podcast mention anything about tailoring these phrases for different industries?
Absolutely. For example, in healthcare, you have phrases like code blue or rapid response, while in IT, you might hear critical system failure or security breach alert.
It's like having a secret code for conveying maximum information with minimum panic.
And despite these industry-specific terms, there's a universal framework they recommend called Alert Impact Action. First, you alert people to the situation,
Yeah.
then explain the impact, and finally, direct the action needed.
But what about those times when people are genuinely freaking out?
Yeah.
Is there a better alternative to yelling, "Don't panic"?
You know, it's funny because the podcast actually addresses this directly.
Okay.
They suggest replacing "don't panic" with something like, "We have a clear protocol for this situation."
I like that.
It shifts the focus from fear to a sense of control and preparedness.
And remember, those follow-up communications are just as crucial as the initial alert.
Yes.
You're providing updates, clarifying next steps, and reinforcing that sense of control.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's say we've nailed the initial communication.
Okay.
Now we need to give an update, and things are still pretty chaotic.
Right.
How do we master speed speaking without sounding like we're about to lose it?
Think about air traffic controllers or emergency dispatchers.
Okay.
They convey urgency while remaining perfectly clear.
Yeah.
They've mastered what the podcast calls the controlled rush.
Controlled rush. I like that.
It's about focusing on being understood quickly, not just talking fast.
Okay.
They suggest thinking of it like precision pacing,
Mm-hmm.
where each syllable gets its due even at high speed.
Okay.
Imagine saying critical situation in progress, but enunciating each syllable clearly.
That makes sense.
How do you manage to breathe while speaking quickly?
I'd be gasping for air.
The podcast is a great tip for that. Power punctuation.
Okay.
It's about breaking your message into breath-sized chunks
Yeah.
and using those pauses to take a breath.
Okay.
Imagine saying, server crash confirmed, breath affecting all departments, breath emergency protocol activated.
So it's like adding invisible commas to your speech,
Yes.
allowing for breath control and clarity, even when time is of the essence.
Exactly.
Does the podcast give any other examples of how to structure a message for speed and clarity?
Yes. They highlight a technique called the triangle technique, used by a crisis management expert during a factory emergency.
Oh.
She had only 30 seconds to communicate safety instructions to 200 workers.
Wow. Talk about pressure.
She used the triangle technique, which involves starting broad, narrowing down, and ending with action.
Okay.
Her message went something like this. Attention, all personnel, broad chemical spill in Sector 4, narrow proceed to emergency exits action.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a simple but effective way to convey crucial information quickly and clearly.
And there's another interesting concept they touch on. Vocal gears.
Yes.
Just like a car, we need to shift gears depending on the message.
Exactly.
We might start in a higher gear to grab attention,
Right.
then shift down to deliver crucial information,
Yeah.
and then back up to emphasize action items.
It's like verbal choreography for emergency situations.
So much to think about. What about those long technical terms that can trip us up in a crisis?
Right.
How do we handle those when speed is of the essence?
The podcast suggests creating what they call speed anchors.
Okay.
They're like simplified versions of complex terms that still convey the essential meaning.
Okay.
Instead of manufacturing facility malfunction, you could say plant shutdown.
So it's all about finding those shortcuts without sacrificing clarity.
Exactly. And here's another quick tip for sounding more in control when you're speaking rapidly, because our voices tend to go higher when we're stressed.
Yeah.
Try consciously lowering your voice.
So it's about projecting authority,
Yeah.
even in a high-pressure situation.
And what about pauses?
Are they okay even when time is critical?
Believe it or not, even in the most urgent situations, strategic pauses can make your message more impactful.
Okay.
It's like punctuation for your speech.
Yeah.
A brief pause after a key piece of information allows the listener to process without disrupting the flow.
It seems like the key to effective emergency communication is all about finding the right balance.
Yes.
Urgency and clarity, control and information.
Exactly. It's about being the calm voice in the storm, even if internally you feel like you're caught in a whirlwind.
Well said. Now let's talk about status updates.
Okay. Status updates are a tricky balancing act. You need to keep people informed without spending all your time giving updates and neglecting the actual problem solving.
It's easy to get caught up in the communication loop when things are chaotic. Does the podcast offer any guidance on how to avoid that trap?
They share a story about an IT director who used a method he called broadcast bulletins to stay on top of communication without derailing recovery efforts.
What are broadcast bulletins exactly?
They were essentially quick, structured updates designed to convey the most crucial information without getting bogged down in unnecessary detail.
So it's about prioritizing need-to-know information over nice-to-know information.
Exactly. And the podcast also highlights the psychological aspect of updates. It's not just about sharing information, but also managing anxiety by filling the silence. People's imaginations run wild when they're left in the dark, so even a brief update can help calm nerves.
It's like that saying, no news is good news. Except in an emergency, no news is usually bad news.
They suggest using a simple template called the 5 W's in 5 seconds. It goes like this. What's happening? Where is it happening? Who is handling it? What's being done? And when can we expect the next update?
I love that. It's a concise and effective way to address the most pressing questions people have without overwhelming them.
And of course, different stakeholders need different levels of detail. The podcast introduces the layer cake approach for this. You start with a core message everyone receives, then add layers of detail for specific audiences. Your CEO might only need the big picture, while your technical team needs all the nitty-gritty.
Makes sense. So it's like creating different versions of the same update tailored to the information needs of each audience. What about those vague promises that tend to crop up during emergencies? Things like, we'll keep you updated.
The podcast suggests replacing vague promises with time anchors. Instead of saying, we'll keep you updated, try next update in 30 minutes or situation review at the top of the hour.
It's about giving people a specific time frame to look forward to, which helps manage expectations and reduces anxiety.
Precisely. Another useful tip they share is the traffic light method for prioritizing updates. Green updates are routine progress reports. Yellow updates signal potential complications, and red updates demand immediate attention. This system helps everyone understand the severity of the situation at a glance.
It's a simple but effective way to categorize information and prioritize action. Now let's talk about the added challenges of virtual teams. When you can't rely on nonverbal cues, does the podcast offer any advice on how to ensure the message gets through?
They recommend using the echo effect to reinforce key points. For example, you might say, server restoration initiated, that's repair work beginning now. The repetition ensures that the message gets through even when there's potential for miscommunication.
It's like saying the same thing twice, but in two different ways to make sure it sticks.
And don't underestimate the power of retrospective updates.
So it's not enough to focus on what's happening now and what's next. We also need to remind people of the progress that's been made.
Exactly. It helps maintain morale and shows that the situation is moving in the right direction. A great example they provide is 3 of 5 systems restored compared to total shutdown an hour ago. It emphasizes the positive movement even amidst challenges.
It's like that saying, don't forget how far you've come. Now let's dive into a topic that adds a whole new layer of complexity to emergency communication: cultural variations.
This is where things can get really interesting, especially when coordinating with global teams during a crisis. What works in one culture might not fly in another.
So how do we navigate those cultural differences? Does the podcast provide any guidance on bridging those communication gaps?
They introduce the concept of the global emergency translation effect, which emphasizes that even simple phrases like ASAP pack can have vastly different meanings across cultures.
They share a case study of a tech company whose direct and urgent American approach actually slowed down the response in their Asian offices.
It's a great example of how something that's intended to be assertive in one culture can be perceived as disrespectful in another.
So how do we avoid those kinds of misunderstandings?
The podcast suggests using what they call cultural bridge phrases. These are emergency communications tailored for cross-cultural understanding. For instance, instead of saying, "We need this done immediately," you might say, "We need this done as quickly as possible, taking into account any local considerations." It conveys the same sense of urgency, but in a more culturally sensitive way.
It's about finding that balance between clarity and respect.
Yeah.
They also talk about something called the hierarchy handler technique, right?
Yes, in some cultures, emergency messages need to flow through specific channels even during a crisis. A junior team member in Singapore might hesitate to communicate directly with senior management, while their counterpart in Sweden wouldn't think twice.
So it's about understanding the unspoken rules of communication in different cultures.
Exactly. The podcast recommends creating permission patterns, which are phrases that acknowledge the hierarchy while still conveying the urgency of the situation. Something like, "I've been asked to inform you that," or "With all due respect, we need to address this urgently."
It's a subtle but important way to navigate those cultural nuances. And it seems like virtual teams add another layer of complexity to this cultural puzzle.
Absolutely. When you can't rely on nonverbal cues, your words need to work even harder to bridge those cultural gaps. The podcast suggests using cultural context markers. Simple phrases like, "in our local time," or "from our regional perspective," can make a big difference.
It's about providing those extra cues that help people interpret the message correctly, especially when they're not physically present.
And here's a fascinating point they bring up. Silence has different meanings across cultures. In some places, silence after receiving instructions indicates understanding and agreement. In others, it might signal confusion or disagreement.
That's a great point. Something as simple as a pause can be interpreted in very different ways depending on the cultural context.
They call it reading the cultural silence. And it's a crucial skill for anyone communicating across cultures, especially in high-pressure situations.
So how do we craft messages that are both clear and culturally sensitive, especially when time is of the essence?
The podcast suggests using what they call the cultural sandwich method.
A cultural sandwich.
That sounds interesting. Tell me more.
It's about structuring your message in a way that's universally effective. You start with a culturally neutral alert, like urgent situation requiring immediate attention.
Right.
Then you add the core message, keeping it as clear and concise as possible. Finally, you end with a culturally appropriate call to action.
So it's like creating a universal emergency language that works regardless of cultural differences.
Precisely. And they also emphasize the importance of using time-specific urgency markers to avoid ambiguity. Instead of saying, "as soon as possible," you might say, "by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time."
It's about eliminating any room for misinterpretation, especially when dealing with global teams operating in different time zones.
And finally, they point out that even nonverbal emergency signals can have cultural variations. What might be a universally understood symbol in one culture could mean something completely different in another.
So how do we overcome that challenge? The podcast suggests using universal emergency indicators, such as universally recognized symbols or clear, concise verbal cues that transcend cultural interpretations.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've learned about building our verbal first aid kit, mastering speed speaking, giving effective status updates, and navigating cultural differences. What else does the podcast cover?
They dive into real-world emergency scenarios, sharing some incredible stories from the front lines of crisis communication. These are situations that truly test your communication skills and separate the pros from the amateurs.
Sounds fascinating. Do any particular stories stand out?
They share a story about a major retail chain that had just navigated a massive data breach. Instead of simply breathing a sigh of relief, their chief security officer launched what they call the Trust Restoration Trilogy.
Trust Restoration Trilogy. That sounds intriguing. What did it involve?
It consisted of 3 carefully crafted communications that turned a potential reputation disaster into a customer loyalty boost. It's like turning lemons into premium organic lemonade.
That's a brilliant example of how effective communication can turn a negative situation into a positive one. And they also talk about the importance of debrief sessions, right?
Yes, but with a twist. Debrief sessions often become blame fests rather than productive learning experiences. The podcast highlights a hospital administrator who used what she calls the positive pattern protocol. Instead of focusing on what went wrong, she started each discussion with, "What did we learn?"
It's a subtle shift in focus, but I imagine it makes a big difference in the tone of the conversation.
Absolutely. It encourages a more constructive and collaborative environment where people feel safe sharing their experiences and insights without fear of judgment.
It's about turning mistakes into learning opportunities.
Exactly. And then they move on to documentation, but not the boring, tedious kind. The podcast describes a tech company that developed the Crisis Chronicle method.
Crisis Chronicle, it sounds almost like a historical document.
They created engaging, almost story-like records of their emergency responses. This made the documentation more accessible and interesting for future teams, turning a dry manual into a captivating read.
That's a brilliant way to preserve institutional knowledge and ensure that lessons learned from past crises are not forgotten. It's about making those experiences come alive for future teams.
And they delve into the psychology of recovery communication, highlighting the importance of future-forward phrasing. Instead of saying, "We survived a crisis," they recommend saying, "We've strengthened our response capabilities."
It's a subtle shift in language, but I can see how it would make a big difference in how people perceive the situation and move forward.
It's about focusing on the positive outcomes of the crisis, highlighting the growth and resilience of the team. And they also emphasize the importance of prevention communication.
So it's not just about responding to crises, it's also about trying to prevent them from happening in the first place.
Exactly. The podcast mentions an airline executive who created pre-play scenarios using past emergencies to build future readiness.
So they're essentially using those past experiences as simulations to prepare for future challenges.
And here's the clever part. She made them sound like action movie plots. This creative approach made emergency preparedness meetings more engaging and memorable, turning a potentially dry topic into something exciting.
That's a fantastic idea. It's about making learning fun and engaging.
And don't forget those team recovery dialogues. They play a crucial role in helping teams process the emotional impact of a crisis.
It's about creating a safe space for people to share their experiences and support each other.
One manufacturing plant manager introduced emotional echo mapping, creating safe spaces for team members to share how the crisis affected them personally.
It's a powerful way to build empathy and understanding within a team. And they also talk about the importance of celebration communication, right?
Absolutely. It's important to acknowledge and celebrate the successful handling of an emergency. The episode describes a CEO who used the growth gratitude method, highlighting specific actions that demonstrated team growth during the crisis.
It's about recognizing and appreciating the efforts of everyone involved, fostering a sense of pride and accomplishment.
Now let's shift our focus to the legal and compliance aspects of emergency communication. This might not sound like the most exciting topic, but trust me, it's crucial.
I know what you mean. We all know that legal considerations can be complex and daunting, especially during a crisis. But the episode promises to make compliance speak not only palatable, but actually powerful.
They call it the legal tightrope walk, finding the balance between clear communication and legal protection.
It's about making sure that your messages are both effective and legally sound.
The episode starts with a story about a tech company facing a potential data breach. Their security director delivered urgent instructions that were both crystal clear and legally bulletproof.
How did she manage that?
She used what the episode calls protected action phrases instead of saying, delete everything, which could have legal ramifications. She said, initiate the approved data protection protocol. This conveyed the same urgency while staying within the boundaries of legal compliance.
It's a brilliant example of how careful wording can make a big difference.
The episode also discusses required emergency phrases, specific language that is used in certain industries to ensure compliance with regulations.
Like the safety announcements we hear on airplanes.
Exactly. There's a method to that seemingly repetitive language. It's called liability-proof linguistics. These phrases are carefully crafted to provide clear instructions while minimizing legal risk.
It's about finding that sweet spot where clarity and compliance intersect.
Another interesting concept is documentation dynamics. The episode describes a hospital administrator who created what she calls real-time legal logging.
Real-time legal logging, that sounds incredibly efficient. How does it work?
She uses specific phrases during emergencies that automatically qualify as legal documentation. This means that she is simultaneously managing the crisis and building her legal protection.
It's like having a lawyer whispering in your ear while you're saving the day.
The episode also discusses the importance of regulatory reporting language, using specific terminology to ensure that all communication complies with relevant regulations.
It's about speaking the language of compliance, making sure that your actions and communications are aligned with legal and regulatory requirements.
One manufacturing plant manager developed a system called the Compliance Cascade. Every emergency announcement was structured to simultaneously inform the team guide actions and fulfill regulatory requirements. Talk about efficiency.
It's like hitting a legal home run while putting out a fire.
The episode also highlights the importance of precise timing in legal communication, which they call temporal liability protection.
It's not just what you say, but when you say it, that can have legal implications. How can we ensure that our timing is legally sound?
Smart leaders create a documented response timeline by carefully timing their emergency communications. This provides a clear record of their actions and decisions, demonstrating that they responded appropriately and in a timely manner.
It's like creating a legal force field around your emergency response. The episode also introduces the concept of protected pause patterns, strategic moments of silence that legally demonstrate thoughtful consideration.
It might sound counterintuitive, but these pauses can actually help prevent lawsuits by showing that you took the time to carefully assess the situation before making decisions.
It's a reminder that silence can be a powerful communication tool, even in the legal arena.
And finally, the episode emphasizes the importance of integrating compliance terminology into everyday communication.
Instead of switching between emergency mode and legal mode, we should strive for a seamless blend of clear and compliant communication.
Exactly. The episode calls this legal camouflage, the art of sounding urgent while staying legally secure.
Now let's move on to the crucial topic of stakeholder management during emergencies. This is where things can get really complex, as we need to communicate effectively with a wide range of audiences, each with their own unique needs and concerns.
Think of it like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. It requires skill, balance, and a lot of coordination.
It's about keeping everyone informed, from customers and employees to the vendors and board members, without creating unnecessary panic or confusion.
The episode kicks off with a masterclass example involving a major airline facing a system-wide shutdown.
A system-wide shutdown that sounds like a communication nightmare. How did they manage to keep everyone informed and calm?
Their head of operations pulled off what the episode calls the stakeholder symphony. He simultaneously communicated with stranded passengers, anxious staff, concerned board members, and hungry media.
That's an impressive feat of communication orchestration. How did he manage to reach so many different audiences effectively?
He used layered messaging architecture. Each announcement contained multiple layers of information, each tailored to a specific stakeholder group. It's like broadcasting on different frequencies through the same speaker, ensuring that everyone receives the information they need in a way that makes sense to them.
What a brilliant approach. It highlights the importance of understanding your audience and crafting messages that resonate with their specific needs and concerns.
The episode also dives into the importance of customer communication during emergencies. One retail giant revolutionized their approach using the Trust Transparency Cascade.
Trust Transparency Cascade, that sounds like a powerful combination. What does it involve?
Instead of resorting to corporate jargon and vague promises, they developed a three-tier message system: immediate impact action steps and recovery timeline. This transparent and straightforward approach actually increased customer trust during their crisis.
That's amazing. It shows that honesty and transparency can be the best policy even during challenging times.
Next, the episode explores the intricacies of vendor coordination during emergencies. One tech company developed partnership pulse points, specific phrases that simultaneously inform suppliers while maintaining confidentiality.
It's like having a secret handshake that only your trusted partners understand.
Exactly. It allows you to communicate essential information without revealing sensitive details that could compromise your operations or reputation.
Another important aspect of stakeholder management is partner notification protocols. The episode highlights a manufacturing CEO who mastered strategic disclosure timing.
She developed a system of timed releases that kept partners informed without causing unnecessary panic or speculation. It's like a carefully controlled drip feed of information, ensuring that everyone is on the same page without overwhelming them.
It's about finding the right balance between transparency and discretion.
Next, we move on to executive briefing techniques. The episode recommends using the pyramid principle for updating leadership.
The pyramid principle, it sounds like a structured approach to delivering information. How does it work?
You start with the conclusion, follow with impact assessment, and end with action items. This provides a concise and actionable summary that allows executives to quickly grasp the situation and make informed decisions.
It's about cutting through the noise and getting straight to the point.
The episode also shares some insights from a crisis PR guru who uses narrative anchoring to connect each crisis update to the company's larger story.
It's about framing the crisis within the context of the company's overall narrative, creating a more compelling and relatable message.
Instead of simply sharing dry facts, she weaves a story of response and recovery, highlighting the company's values and commitment to its stakeholders.
It's a powerful way to build trust and maintain a positive image, even during challenging times.
And finally, the episode emphasizes the importance of stakeholder empathy mapping. Before sending any message, smart leaders ask themselves, how will each stakeholder group feel when they hear this?
It's about putting yourself in the shoes of your audience and anticipating their emotional responses to your communication.
One hospital director uses emotional echolocation to adjust her message tone and content based on each group's primary concerns. This empathetic approach helps build trust and rapport even during stressful situations.
Now let's move on to the final piece of the puzzle, emergency response training. This is where we put all those communication skills to the test and turn theory into practice.
Think of it as communication boot camp, where we transform nervous speakers into crisis communication ninjas. The episode shares a story about a Fortune 500 company that revolutionized their emergency response training using the pressure cooker protocol.
Pressure cooker protocol, that sounds intense. What does it involve?
Instead of traditional tabletop exercises, they created immersive scenarios that simulate real communication pressure. Imagine executives giving emergency briefings while alarms are blaring and phones are ringing nonstop.
That sounds like a true test of composure and communication skills.
It's like practicing your piano recital during an earthquake. If you can nail it, then you can nail it anytime. The episode also highlights the importance of drill coordination phrases.
So specific language to guide the training exercises.
Exactly. One hospital developed something they call simulation acceleration language, phrases that can instantly ramp up or dial down the intensity of a scenario. It gives the trainers more control and allows them to really push participants outside their comfort zones.
And what about creating realistic training scenarios? The episode mentioned something called scenario stacking, right?
Yes, this is where you layer multiple mini-crises into one training session. It forces participants to juggle different communication styles and priorities simultaneously. It's like playing chess on 3 boards while giving a speech. It really develops mental agility and adaptability.
But it's not just about putting people through the ringer, right? Feedback is crucial for improvement.
Absolutely. The episode recommends the mirror moment methodology. This involves creating opportunities for participants to see and hear themselves handling crisis communications. It allows them to identify areas for improvement and adjust their approach in real time.
It's like having a time machine for improving your emergency speaking skills. But how do we ensure that these skills become second nature so they're there when we need them most?
The episode discusses the importance of building muscle memory for crisis communication. One airline developed verbal reflex training exercises that create automatic response patterns for different types of emergencies. It's like building a mental autopilot for your crisis communication.
That's brilliant. It takes the thinking out of it, allowing you to respond instinctively and effectively, even under pressure.
Another fascinating technique is stress inoculation speaking. This involves gradually exposing teams to increasingly challenging communication scenarios, building their confidence and resilience over time.
It's like getting a vaccination against communication breakdowns. By the time they face a real crisis, they've already experienced something even more challenging in training. And what about ensuring that the training program stays relevant and effective over time?
The best training programs use what the episode calls continuous calibration, constantly adjusting scenarios based on real-world experiences and participant feedback. It's like having a living, breathing training program that evolves with each session, always staying one step ahead of the curve.
That's a great way to ensure that the training remains engaging, challenging, and aligned with the ever-changing landscape of crisis communication. It's about creating a culture of continuous learning and improvement.
And as we wrap up our exploration of emergency response speaking, remember, it's not just about knowing what to say. It's about having the confidence and competence to say it under pressure. And with proper training and practice, anyone can develop those crucial skills.
It's about transforming anxiety into authority, turning every crisis into an opportunity for growth and leadership. And the skills we've learned today can be applied in any situation, not just emergencies. They can help us communicate more effectively in meetings, presentations, and even everyday conversations.
So there you have it, a comprehensive toolkit for navigating the complexities of emergency communication. From crafting effective messages to building resilience and leading with confidence, the insights from this episode can empower us all to become more effective communicators in any situation.
And remember, folks, practice makes perfect. The more you practice these techniques, the more natural and instinctive they will become. So why not challenge yourself to implement one new strategy this week?
It could be something as simple as incorporating the Alert Impact Action framework into your next urgent email, or practicing the controlled rush speaking technique during a team meeting. Every step you take towards improving your communication skills brings you closer to becoming that calm, confident voice that everyone relies on when things get tough.
And that's it for our deep dive into emergency response speaking. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the psychological underpinnings of crisis communication to the latest digital tools and training techniques. We hope you found this episode informative, engaging, and empowering.
We encourage you to revisit the original episode, Business English Podcast, episode 38, for a deeper dive into any of the topics that resonated with you. And remember, communication is a skill that can be continuously honed and refined. The more we learn and practice, the more effectively we can connect with others, build trust, and navigate the complexities of the modern world.
Now, before we sign off, we want to hear from you. What were your biggest takeaways from this episode? What strategies or techniques resonated most with you?
Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation. We're always eager to learn from our listeners and grow together as a community of communication enthusiasts.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the world of business communication. We've got some fascinating topics lined up for you, so stay tuned.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep communicating with clarity, confidence, and impact.